I offer my most sincere apologies to any of you who are true devotees to speculations about time travel, even to those who attempt to garner some credibility for science fiction by quoting Albert Einstein's conceptions of time. But I would like to say, at least from a philosophical perspective, that time does not exist. Time is not a thing. It's not a river that you can row upstream and go backwards or paddle faster to go forward. Time is merely a way of marking movement. That is, if nothing ever moved, if every cell, every molecule, every atom simply stayed still, there would be no time. Time is change and motion. Time, then, is a conceptual measuring stick simply to mark change. The sun rises and sets as the earth turns, which for us defines the passage of a day, something sadly missed by the writer of the creation story in the first chapter of Genesis, who insists that God was creating heaven and earth, light and night on a day, separating water and land on a second day. On a third day, the omnipotent made plant life, but didn't make the sun until the fourth day, which means that the first 3 days were just guesses. They had no idea what a day was. A day is simply the rising and setting of the sun in our experience. You cannot, as Superman movies might suggest, reverse time like a DVD by making the earth go backwards a few revolutions. Though all of the world's religions insist upon trying to make certain aspects of time more holy, as if the seasons of Christmas and Easter or Hanukkah or Ramadan are really anything other than just the continued rotation of the earth. The truth is, there is only change. Christmas is not more holy than Festivus, nor do our calendars have any special power. January 1st of the year 2000 looked a lot like December 31st of 1999. They're just numbers counting the rotations of the earth. And yet we will celebrate the arrival of a new year this week with rituals that attempt to imbue that turning of the calendar with importance that it simply does not inherently have. Though, as the Japanese proverb teaches, the day you decide to do it is your lucky day. The first month of the year is named for the two-faced Roman god, Janus. January, falling at that time of the year in the northern hemisphere, where days are beginning to get a little longer, was seen as a doorway into a new year. This is a fairly rare case where the Greeks had no similar god. But in Roman tradition, Janus was the god of transformation, the portal of potential change. People don't always change very much, and when they do, they don't change very fast. But we see the marking of a new year as a potential for change. In honor of Janus, we still make New Year's resolutions to use the perception of the passage of time to make ourselves or our world better. If you've been thinking about joining a gym and going to work out and get in shape, I suggest that you wait until February 1st, when almost all of the New Year's resolutions of our neighbors will again be a part of history. January, the gyms will be packed with people who are, to paraphrase Samuel Johnson, demonstrating the triumph of hope over experience. But I don't want to make light of New Year's resolutions. If people cannot make a conscious decision to change for the better, then there is absolutely no reason to ever deliver another sermon. This weekly exercise we engage in exists in part to inform, but surely it is also to inspire, to persuade, to encourage us to try to change in ways that more fully embody our shared values. In the good old days, we could dispense with informing and persuading and go straight for threats and fear and promises of rewards. I kind of miss the old days, but as I observed earlier, there is no going back in time. I'm going to have to try to work with what we have left. 2016 is an election year. And I find it interesting that there is conversation on both sides of the political continuum that cries out the desire to take our country back. The Tea Party has been chanting that for years, and I think they mostly mean that they want to take their country back from the black guy who lives in the White House. I think they would like to rename it the Whites Only House and go back to that time. But it's not just the right-wing candidates that want to take our country back. You could also say in many ways that Bernie Sanders wants to take our country back for the middle class, wresting authority from the control of the super wealthy. You cannot escape the draw of the Clinton campaign for those who, in spite of his failings, still miss Bill and would rather like to see the Clintons back in the White House. But the more remarkable fear-driven turn back the hands of time sentiments do seem to primarily come from the right. I never dreamed that anyone in my lifetime would reference the massively illegal and morally bankrupt internment of Japanese families during World War II as having been a good thing. But recently, the leader in the Republican primaries, Donald Trump, suggested that we put American Muslims in internment camps and defended that policy by referencing how well it worked out for us to put the Japanese in internment camps. I never dreamed that I would hear something so massively evil and simultaneously stupid coming out of the mouth of someone who just might become the President of the United States, which makes 2016 look a bit more like Alice falling through the looking glass than it does a 21st century political conversation. And though it's not been talked about much in the media, former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum's views on birth control really do sound like a page out of a 1950s Catholic sermon. Now, you have to hand it to him. His 8 children bear witness to the fact that he and his wife evidently practice what they claim to believe. But he would then defend that by saying that artificial birth control is abusive to women. How is it abusive? Because it encourages them to have sex for some reason other than to have children. And he sees that as abuse, which makes you wonder what his real conceptions of either women or sex really are. Thankfully, Santorum is so far down in the polls as to be virtually insignificant in the race. But what concerns me is how many people would really like to return to the security of the past, when gay people couldn't get married, when most blacks didn't vote, when we could pay Mexican farm workers pennies on the hour to do hard work for us and then kick them out of the country under the rubric of them being the criminals. And then to take health care away from millions of people because they are not sufficiently affluent to be able to pay to stay alive. Progress never happens in a straight line. Society, marriages, businesses, churches, even friendships take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, sometimes 2 or 3 steps back. Progress never just goes forward in a straight line, but it eventually must, and going backwards is not really an option. Lots of people may still hate it, but once given equal rights, gay people will not be forced back into a second-class tier of society. They will never be able to put that genie back in the bottle. The new Tea Party governor in my home state of Kentucky, Matt Bevin, in his first month in office, removed the right to vote from 140,000 former felons, and then reversed the previous governor's decision to raise the minimum wage for government workers to over $10 an hour. Bevin took away $3 an hour, nearly 30% of the pay of people who are already living in poverty, because no one can live on $10 an hour. But he wanted it to be even lower than that. Bevin is a living example of what happens when you move from conservative Fox News chest thumping into actual real life governing. Now, I hope that people are paying attention, because Images of a dystopian future may work for a Mad Max movie, but not so well in the real world. They're a bad idea in the real world. Still, everyone on the Republican stage, all devout Christians, all of them, say that they are still opposed to a minimum wage increase. And Donald Trump went so far as to say that salaries in America are too high and that the minimum wage needs to be lowered in order for American manufacturing to become competitive in the world market. As they ratchet up the rhetoric in the full swing of the campaign of 2016, I'm left to wonder how long it's going to be before one of them mentions that the Constitution of the United States does make a provision for legal slavery. No one seems to see the connection between this kind of crazy rhetoric and what actually happens in the real world. If you keep indoctrinating, if you keep feeding people on hatred and fear, they begin to vote like that. And eventually they will elect a candidate who acts like that. Several presidential candidates are big fans of the NSA's metadata, large-scale invasion of privacy of the entire population. But several are emphatic about wanting to monitor and shut down Muslim mosques where domestic terrorists are being radicalized. And you can understand the reasoning behind that. That mass murder that took place in San Bernardino earlier this month, if you could trace the radicalization of this native-born American citizen who went to college in America, got a pretty good job in America, and was leading a pretty good life in America, who became radicalized enough to commit those kinds of murders, if you could trace that back to a particular imam or mosque, you would have reason to shut that down. There are religious and political subcultures that spread a way of thinking that directly leads to violence and terrorism. What I object to is that we do not appear to be having a similar conversation about what radicalized the guy that committed the mass murder at Planned Parenthood in Colorado last month. Who radicalized him? Who fed him the false information that Planned Parenthood was selling body parts of aborted fetuses? Didn't that come straight from the mouth of Carly Fiorina? We want to deport Muslim imams who teach hatred and fear, who manipulate and radicalize their followers with misinformation, convincing them that they are victims of inferior people. But why do we tolerate an entire news agency devoted to manipulating low information viewers, convincing them that they are victims of people who are inferior to them, and literally insisting that their army of frightened, paranoid followers be allowed to arm themselves with every manner of lethal weapon? I'm all about free speech, but we all know from our middle school civics class that freedom of speech doesn't allow you to yell fire in a crowded theater. The people who try to manipulate the public through fear, and this goes a long way back, fear of American Indians, fear of communists, fear of socialists, fears of Jews and Catholics and immigrants, feminists, homosexuals, AIDS, terrorists, Ebola, and now Syrian refugees. Don't they have some responsibility for radicalizing the fringe of their crazy followers? Can't there be a time when we wake up to the fact that the United States has never made a good decision out of fear? Fear-based actions are almost always wrong. The names of the months, the numbers on the calendars, mean nothing at all. But what is true is that the world is in motion. The world is changing. Time is change. We can change for the better, or we can change for the worse. We can make principled, moral, spiritually inspired decisions about how we will shape the world, or we can react in fear, like sheep hoping to run into the arms of a pretentious, dishonest shepherd because we believe that he will somehow protect us. For me, progress is a matter of moral determination and courage. The word faith does not mean believing in something that's too stupid to believe. Faith, pistis in Greek, literally means having the courage of your convictions, having the courage to live out the principles that you have chosen. As Cesar Chavez said, once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned how to read. You cannot humiliate a person who feels pride. You cannot oppress a people who refuse to be afraid. Be proud of being progressive liberals. Don't be afraid of the future. Make the future what it ought to be.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.